You are now a first-round draft pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and follow Daniel Murphy. So the format here for the next few minutes, if we could, is I'm just going to ask very short questions. This is a remarkable individual in the middle of an incredible life. They won't be long questions, but I'm then going to ask if there are questions from here in the room. This is a very engaged group, so we'll take the next 20 or so minutes so you get a chance to hear Dr. Mandela. But Dr. Mandela, thank you for spending all the time with us today. I have to start on a couple of things that you've mentioned over the course of the last 2 days here. When you think about service, we're going to talk about your dad in a minute, but you have used the word service and your idea of service and leadership. What do you mean, and how do we get more of it?
For me, service is what my father talked about when he got out of prison and talked about servant leadership. It is really listening to people, as my daughter explained yesterday, and giving of yourself fully. And service is not thinking of yourself, because my father's way of leading was leading from behind, not in front. As my daughter explained yesterday, it was much more of a consensual leadership, where he discussed with people and finally made his mind. Sometimes he, in the way that he thought things would be, he would be defeated by his colleagues, and he had to yield with no pride. I'll give you an example. I mean, my father is criticized by some, is lauded by some. When he was president, and they had just defeated apartheid, because he felt they had to create institutions that were credible in terms of legal framework. He had a clash with the head of the rugby association in South Africa, and he took him to court. And a lot of his colleagues said, my father must not yield to the court. He's the president, he shouldn't go to court. But he said, I am a president, but I have to obey the laws of this country. Because if I, as a president, don't obey, how am I expecting the rest of the citizens to actually respect and obey the laws of the country? So he led by example. My father never stood on a pedestal and say, look at me, how great am I? He let his work and his actions speak for the values that he stood for. And I don't think that you, President Tim, stand on a pedestal and say, look what I have achieved. You've allowed your work and the actions to speak about what a great leader you are. Those are the type of leaders we want. Yes. And we have to promote those leaders. Mm-hmm. And I think we are not documenting enough what drives you, what creates you to have this passion and the zeal that is students first. I mean, as I drive, it's a short distance, but as I drive here, I see how the students on this campus, they don't even call you by your first name. They don't even say president.
That's the nicest thing they call me, my first
name. And the fact that you've taken this university to make it a viable center of renewal and revival of downtrodden community, to me, is an amazing feat. And so if we would have more people like you, you need to tell the stories.
You're here.
And I'm volunteering, because we have Mandela Media. You'll be our first candidate that we interview.
Accepted. Great job. Thank you. So as you all start to think about what you'd like to ask about, let me ask about those early days that things have been forming inside of you and inside of your daughter that have brought you to where you are today. We'll go past the age of 6 or 7, and then you were a teenager, but there's some time in your 30s. Maybe you can tell us about where you started to describe your father as a rebel and stubborn. Words your daughter might now use for you, I understand. Obviously a revolutionary, a politician. Tell us kind of that journey, that adult journey in your 30s and 40s that has brought you here today, to the things you've decided are your priorities?
I think for me, look, I've said this openly. As I grew up, I had this love but angry relationship with my dad because I couldn't understand why he chose politics over us, his children. But what drove me was I'm going to show him a thing or two. I'm going to succeed way beyond his expectation. That he was not there, it shouldn't matter. But I think what also helped me is that the African culture is a beautiful culture because you are really never without a father. Because there's this thing called fictive kin networks, which means your whole community takes you over and nurtures you. So your next door neighbor parent is your mother. He can discipline you, he can do everything to you like your own mother, and you can't say, what are you doing? You're not my mother, because your mother will come home and hear that and will give you a hiding. So, I mean, I grew up in that type of environment. I went to boarding school when I was between 6 and 7 in Swaziland because my father was in hiding then. They did not believe in the apartheid education. So Swaziland was a British protectorate there. The education was very good. It was a boarding school with a Roman Catholic boarding school with nuns who were very strict. So it molded me and shaped me, basically to what I am. But I think what drove me really in my life is I'm going to show my dad a thing or two. And I think and my father always encouraged, when you go to see him, every letter that he ever wrote was, education is important. Okay, you finish high school, you've got to go and get your degree. You get your first degree, says, no, you have to carry on, you must get your honors, you know. And so that's how it happened for me. So when I came to the United States, my father wanted me to go to Harvard. But unfortunately, I didn't get into Harvard. I got into UMass, Massachusetts. And when I came here and I got the Fulbright scholarship to come and study here, it was an exciting time to be here. And I think, though what I experienced, the America which I expected was laid with diamonds and gold and silver, that's not the America that I experienced when I came here. Because we had an orientation in Washington, D.C., and when we were being taken around trips in Washington, D.C., it was very easy to still see the inequities in the American society because nobody told me this is where poor black people were living. You could see it. It was similar to South Africa. And so it was an eye-opener for me. But I came to America with the attitude of improving myself, but actually going back home and offering my services there. Mm-hmm. And I think, as I say, I was a very angry young woman. But at some point, I decided it is important for me to heal myself. I went on a spiritual journey. I'm not going to claim I'm religious, but I'm very spiritual. I believe there is a higher power. And once I started doing that, I knew I had to heal the relationship between me and my dad. And I had read a book by, who's this famous actor,
Joan?
Yes.
Huh?
Jones enough. Julia says Jones enough.
But
Let's
I'll
keep going.
remember it.
Joan Crawford.
But she had a very torturous, it's a famous film actress. Jane Fonda, yeah, sorry. I'm saying
Thank
Joan.
you, to Queen. The
Yes,
daughter comes through again.
And she had a very conflictual relationship with the father. And at some point, when they were doing the movie on Golden Point, Jane Fonda had come with the boyfriend's son, and the father had taken to the son and was swimming and doing everything, then he asked Audrey Hepburn, why can't he do that with me? So Audrey Hepburn says to Jane Fonda, look, it is the child who has to make the effort to heal the relationship. It is not the other way around. And that for me was like, wow, that was my turning point with my relationship with my dad. And I can safely say I'm very proud sitting here today, because the last years, let me say about 5-6 years of my dad, when he was very, very sickly, I was there for him every day until the end. And I knew I had to get rid of the anger, because it was good. It was not for my father, it was for me personally. Because after that, I think I flourished, I became very creative, I became very innovative, and that's why I started the House of Mandela Company. And I think for me, forgiveness, I did not understand when my father says it takes courage to forgive, but courage, forgiveness is freeing of yourself, until I experienced myself with my relationship with my dad.
Excellent, bravo. We're going to get to House of Mandela in a second, because it's interesting, the decisions you made along the way. You've created a triangle, and maybe you can help us think it through with you. Poverty, education, and food security. And we've all read about you, we've seen numerous interviews with you globally on these issues. Can you give us your thinking about, you've chosen to make that high priority. What should we be thinking about?
Well, as we have set and set up our foundation, House of Mandela Family Foundation, we decided to focus really on 5 things, which is education, health, because my brother, with a bias on AIDS, because my brother passed away because he was infected, he had AIDS, and to focus on agriculture, which is for an alternative women, and the cliche of saying women's empowerment. Africa is more headed by female households. And for me, I chose agriculture because I've been very passionate about agriculture, as I said earlier, because I think it's not just one of the ways, it's the major way in which we can get a lot of our women out of poverty and teach them how to create wealth. Without us learning how to create wealth as women, we can talk about the Me Too movement, women's movement. Let's be honest, we will never be fully accepted on the top table to make decisions. Years after we've talked about women's empowerment, we're still talking about women's empowerment today. So I believe, President Tim, unless we create women billionaires, whether at the lowest level, at the middle rung, at the top level, the world doesn't change. And so we have to focus on how you create wealth. Men already know, they're born knowing how to create wealth. They know about money. We need to learn, we need to bring you closer to learn. When you meet in these secret societies and these boardrooms and the tennis courts, that's where you discuss all the secrets of making money. And we have to stop thinking that women don't understand. Money, unfortunately, in the world we live in today, whether we like it or not, makes the world go around. And so I am a firm believer that we have to teach our people the commercial skills, how to make money, how to generate wealth in their local communities. And in fact, our government, South African government, talks about what you call kasi economy, which means township economies. How do you create vibrant economies in the townships? But we haven't got it right yet. So for me, I've chosen agriculture because I think I've seen my father do it. I've seen the richest people in South Africa are actually agricultural farmers. But they are white, African, what you call Boer farmers. They are exporting to the world. There's no reason for South Africa today to be exporting. We export beef from Brazil. We get chicken from America. We can grow our own chicken. We have enough land. We just need the talent, and we need people who think alike, universities who are in agricultural experience. We need corporations that are in agriculture to come and work with us, because we have the land to be able to change and not import food, but to grow and export food.
Right, great. So you went in a different place. You went commercial there. That was really interesting. You're talking to a free market economist. I'm in. So I also learned everything I know about money from my wife. So I'll call it that. Yesterday, Takwini made some really provocative and interesting comments about founding fathers, was the term she used, and America. And we'll give you the mic in a second if you'd like. And you did again today. You talked about kind of the great experiment that is America, and why and how the founding fathers came to do what they did. But you have some observations for us on the current state. Maybe it's from the viewpoint of Johannesburg, but as a global citizen, what should we know?
I think we tend to forget history and not relearn from the history that we have. When I take, and I'll give my daughter will answer better this question. When I came here as a student, we were taken to Pennsylvania. We were told America is the great experiment, but experiment in harnessing the good. And I'm saying, and the founding fathers of this country found it on a principle of equity. Yes, there was the civil war between the North and South, but it was a war that was trying to prevent the evil to seep into the rest of society. And I'm saying, during the Second War, America was the pioneer of the Marshall Plan to save Germany and Europe. And this is what America is known for. Yes, there are other things that America has done in the world, but basically, it is the goodness, Americans are very giving. And if you here do not stand up to what we observe happening in America, because we watch CNN, we watch BBC, and I can assure you, we in South Africa, we sit there, my daughter, and say, okay, what's really happening to America? If you do not stand up and say, this is not what America is. I think yesterday or the day before, Don Lemon flighted the comments from Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican president, about what it means to be American in America. It is contrary, totally contrary to what is happening to America now. And so I'm saying, if you lose the place in the world in which people admire you for your values and what you stand for, then there's no America. It is fractured. You can use all kinds of languages and all kinds of, it's not going to happen. And I think just as Americans helped us during the apartheid years, we can only support Americans if they are in the forefront to fight to reclaim what is truly theirs. And that is not going to happen because people want to emphasize differences. Diversity is what this country was founded on. Diversity is what will carry this country into the future. And you cannot allow it to be stopped. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
You are talking about this university, a great university. You have students from 40 countries. That's what makes Jacksonville University. And the diversity of those students that come from different makes this university community very, very vibrant. Right. You stop that, you can't grow. Yes. And so that's what I'm saying.
And I'll walk over. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'll just emphasize what Mama is saying by telling you guys another story like I told last night. So my family and I are descendants of King Ngubengcuka, who ruled Tembuland in the 1800s. King Ngubengcuka founded the Tembu Nation. And the Tembu Nation was not made of Xhosa people only, of Xhosa-speaking people only. The Tembu Nation was made out of people who were dispossessed, people who were running away from something, people who were looking for a new home, people who were looking for a new way of life. And he embraced all of those people. So much so, he said that the Tembu Nation's strength was their unity. He didn't believe in being divisive. He didn't believe that because you were different, you did not belong in the Tembu Nation. He embraced everyone. So I grew up in the United States. I came to this land when I was 10 years old. And this is where I learned to be confident. This is where I learned to challenge other people's ideals and learn to accept people when they challenge me. This is where I learned to respect other people's ideals. So I found it confounding today that this America has completely changed to the opposite direction, where we don't want to hear other people's views, even if we disagree with them. My grandfather always used to say that even if you disagree with your mortal enemy, it's important that you treat them with respect and dignity. Those things are crucial. And he would say, it's easy to bring a mortal enemy to the negotiating table, but to make him turn around and see your point of view, that is the most difficult thing. So I think it's important for all of us sitting in this room, whether we agree or disagree with each other, to respect each other's views and to take those views in, because that is the basis in which America was founded upon.
Thank you. So one brief comment, then we'll take some questions from the audience. That if there's any one place in the American society where what you're describing needs to take place, we believe it needs to start with young people being educated in universities. And there are universities from California to Maine which come down very hard right and very hard left. And I believe strongly what I said at 11 o'clock today. Our goal is to open minds, not fill them up. And it's one hell of a fight right now. They're seeing what they're seeing in other places, and it's an honor. It's something when people get on an airplane and fly 18 hours and remind us what our values are, but we appreciate it, I'll tell you that. So with that, why don't I open it up for a couple of questions. Rick, did you want to start?
Dr. Mandela, yes, you mentioned one of your top priorities, a big project that you have is the Memorial Gardens project. And I wonder if you mind commenting on that project and what you're doing and what your vision is for it.
Well, because my dad has become such a mythical figure, we know that we own him. In the African culture, when somebody passes away, we say he has joined the ancestral world. And for us, that ancestral world can only be visited by those who are close to him. But we realize that we really truly never owned Tata alone as a family, neither as South Africa, that the world claims him and owns him. And that the really symbolic way in which we carry this legacy forward is to create a memorial garden at home, on his land, on his farm, in Kunu, in the Transkei, in the Eastern Cape, very close, 2 hours away from East London. And we want to create this memorial garden as a garden of freedom, so that when people come there, they can walk the journey that my dad walked. They can reflect on their own struggles individually to free themselves, as Karel says, and when they finish that walk, they can come up, back out, energized to do something, to take some action, to change themselves, to change their communities, to change society. This is our aim. We have already finished phase 1, where my dad is lying. We are in the process now, we did it with our own family money. We're in the process now of raising money to do phase 2 and phase 3 of the memorial garden.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Frank. Sarah, what do you think, Frank?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Let me preface this by company, Johnson & Johnson, has been in South Africa 90 years. We started in 1930, as we were talking. But having been responsible for that country during apartheid, and knowing when your father was released from prison, and we knew discussions between him and F.W. de Klerk were going on. My question is, can you give us some insight into how those discussions went? Because it took the two of them to move the country forward without bloodshed and to both get the Nobel Peace Prize.
I think the discussions that went on really predate even de Klerk coming to power. Because there were discussions when the Nationalist Party realized that the writing on the wall was on the wall, because they could not control the country anymore. There were uprisings inside, mainly driven by youth. And there was all the sanctions around the globe against apartheid regime. Apartheid regime was actually throttled economically. So they had to come to the negotiating table. They started negotiating with the ANC outside, the movement outside. Oliver Tambo, Thabo Mbeki were part of the negotiation. Then they decided to also talk to my father. But my father was very clear, I cannot negotiate anything fully unless I have a track to the outside movement. I don't make decisions alone, I make it with the movement outside. In actual fact, I would say 6 years before my father was officially released, they wanted to release my dad to the Bantustan of Transkei. And he refused because he was very clear he was not fighting for the liberation of Bantustan, he was fighting for the liberation of South Africans in all of South Africa. And and he actually negotiated with them that he was not going to come out first. There were other people who were deserving to come out before him, because he didn't want the National Party to release him and then leave the other comrades inside. So Walter Sisulu, who is actually my father's mentor, who actually identified the strengths of my father and introduced him into the ANC, was released first. But Walter was a brilliant man. Nobody knows about Walter Sisulu, but he's an unsung hero who worked from behind. And he was prepared to sacrifice to work from the behind for the good of the cause. And so that's another quality of leadership. You don't have to be on the front, you can work from the back. But for the good of the cause that you're working for. And so by the time they had serious discussions with my father, there was already a conduit to the movement that was in exile. So de Klerk came on board and was brave enough to do what no Nationalist Party leader had done before, and that was to unban first the ANC in the country and PAC, and then allow exiles to come back home. But most of the exiles came through the Bantustan of Transkei, and then my father was released at a point in time.
So during your time at the University of Massachusetts getting your PhD, you start to receive letters from a brash prisoner. And I'm wondering if he'd like to, everything that you had come to embody, we're going back decades now, when Khalil Osiris started to reach you. And as I've heard it told many times, you two had no history, but later met up. And it is such an extraordinary story, and there are so few people here who've heard it before. I wonder if I can ask Khalil Osiris if he wouldn't mind coming forward, and why reach out to Dr. Makaziwe Mandela when you're in prison?
Well, thank you, Tim. My motivation for writing Makaziwe was that I had been reading the works of Viktor Frankl, actually, Man's Search for Meaning, and had really been grappling with this idea that you could find meaning in suffering, that you have a responsibility to ask yourselves the question of what kind of human being you want to be. And what would you like to become of your life? And being marginalized in a prison, I called it being buried alive. It's like you're alive, but actually you get a chance to experience what it must be like to be dead. Because people have to carry on without you in ways that you never imagined. And you don't know how they'll fill the gaps of your absence until you have enough distance to see what becomes of them and their choices. I'm talking about your children, your wives, people you love, who you care deeply about. And I saw in Nelson Mandela an example that we could be bigger than our circumstances. No matter how horrific, no matter how painful you experience life as, you have something more inside you to give than the suffering and the externalized conditions. And he was clear evidence to me, as was Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, that something more is possible. And in fact, we're called to it. And that who we become is defined by how we answer that call. And as I read about Makaziwe, just something deep in my spirit said to me, write her, ask the question. Tell her about your journey, tell her your story, how irresponsible you were, how you're not in prison for the ideals that her father fought for. That in fact you took a very different path, but you've arrived at the same place. And that place is my humanity matters more than anything. No matter how violent this environment is of prison, I want to be an example of nonviolence. And so when I wrote Mackie, I was just writing her, number one, to release me, to open share my heart with someone who I felt might understand. And the fact that she did, I think, was the greatest kind of epiphany for me of the whole experience. Because as I've always, like my whole life, I've always encountered people who had no reason to care, but who did. Had no reason to give, but they did. Had no reason to celebrate, but they created a platform. That example is with Michael and Pam Oates, right here in this room. Hazel, my mother now. I mean, what I'm saying to you is that our humanity matters more than anything else in our journey. And that's what Makaziwe responded to me. That was her message, that she was passionate about my humanity, not not the things that I did wrong to get there. She didn't harp on that. She inquired about my humanity. What kind of person do you want to be? What kind of choices are you going to make? What do you hope for your future? How are you living now? That kind of kindness in a really violent space will shift you, it will change you in ways you cannot imagine. So we've never had a chance really to tell this story in any kind of public forum. But I do know that when I walked into that Woolies, it's the Whole Foods of South Africa. And I walked around the corner and I saw her. I know how she was thrown off, like, who in the world with this American accent? And when I said Khalil, and she said, the one from Prison in America? That feeling once again, my humanity was affirmed. She spoke to me in a way that said, I see you. I care about you. You matter. And I know you have made horrible choices, but that's not what this encounter is about. This encounter is about your higher angels. So thank you, Sis Mackie. Thank you for all those years ago, 1986. Who would have ever imagined? 1986? Madiba got out before me. I wept in prison when he got out. But he got out before me. And we were no longer in contact. No communication, had never actually seen each other until I went there. And it turns out we were living 2 blocks from each other in Hyde Park, living right around the corner from each other. Who could have imagined that? Like, I couldn't have planned the steps. Now, I know some people say, I don't talk about it in a religious sense, but I do say, I know for me, my story, I don't know anyone else, my story is that God stepped in when I was incapable of doing the walking. That was my story. Something bigger than me took over and guided me, set me on a path, and as my grandmother said, put a hedge of protection around me because I was such a knucklehead. And that is why today, fundamentally, when I talk about personal accountability and taking ownership for your choices and all the other things that have to do with messages that are not particularly popular right now, it's always someone else's fault. It's always, and especially in the criminal justice field, Kevin, you know this, in the criminal justice field, I didn't write Makaziwe talking about I was innocent and woe is me and I'm another Black American caught up in the criminal justice system that's unjust and it's so unfair and they did this to me and they did that to me. I don't think she actually would have responded if I would have written that kind of letter. I wrote a letter about something much different than that. And what I'm saying today, it remains true. Let's own our own power to be kind, to be decent, to take ownership for your choices. Broken criminal justice system, do you know that that's a footnote when you find a person who's willing to do their own healing? I'll never make the kinds of choices that led me to prison in the past. I'll never make them again. Not because I don't have the option, it's because I now have values that are more clearly defined. I know who I am. I know the kind of human being I want to be. And it's the kind of human being that you've shown me in your kindness when you wrote back.
But here's what I want to say to my young brother. You made bad choices. You came from a privileged home. There are many, many children all over the world who don't have those kinds of choices, who come from poor, broken homes. And what we are called, me and you,
Yes.
is still to give them
Yes.
a helping hand
Absolutely.
and create an environment where they can flourish. And that's why, for me, I'm sorry, Tim, what Tim is doing, and say university, but we're going to work with the communities around us, is giving that helping hand. What Kevin did on that bus, to me, is amazing. There was no need for Kevin to care about that young man who baked the cake yesterday, and give him the hope and the confidence. And a lot of people who are struggling in life, whether they're homeless or whatever, need just a nudge to say, as you say, I recognize you, you are somebody, you are a human being. You know, I read a story once about Mother Teresa. I had visited somewhere in Texas. And one of the journalists who's the Roman Catholic asked her, Mother Teresa, what can we do for you? You know, he says, no, I don't need anything. He says, oh, please, Mother Teresa. What can you say? Mother Teresa said, if you care so much, because that's what it's called. That's what it's called to work with homeless. He says, wake up in the morning at 4 a.m. and go around the streets of Texas and give the homeless people a hope. Because when we see, most of us, when you see homeless people, we tend to ignore them like we don't see them. If they're white, white drivers, as if, oh, this is a disgrace, I'm not, if they're black, we ignore them. But if we would just have the kindness to stop and say, hello, how are you doing? We don't have to be judgmental. They're drug addicts or whatever. We don't know what led them to be there. We just have to help and stop being too judgmental of other people. And that's how we start the healing and building of our societies.
Brilliant. One last question. Thank you, Khalil, for sharing your story. There are hundreds of, yes ma'am.
I wanted to get your opinion on something, but I first wanted to say when I went to South Africa, I was amazed at the similarities I saw between South Africa and the United States. And I had, though apartheid had never been used here, that was my experience of it. One difference I saw was the poor people in South Africa lived on the fringes, and the middle class, wealthier white South Africans lived in the city. And ours was the reverse, although now that seems to be switching because there's, the cities are being gentrified. But, and I say this, I'm not talking about the South because I grew up in the North. Only my experience with the South is only since I've been retired. But I just wonder if there's any similarity between what has happened in the criminal justice system, and I want to say how important programs like Operation New Hope are to cities and perhaps small towns too. I guess we'll have to see. But since looking at the criminal justice system here, that went from, was it 300,000 in the 80s to 2.2 million now? Has anything like that happened in South Africa where the numbers have just increased so much, or is there no comparison between the two countries in that way?
I think there are similarities. Look at when we inherited the New Dawn, got rid of apartheid. My father was elected as president. Some of the laws in South Africa have stayed the same. The judiciary has also, to a large extent, stayed the same. So you'll find that most of the people who are in the jails of South Africa are majority black. And our prisons are very crowded, overly overcrowded. And I think the issue of rehabilitation of prisoners and re-entry program has not really taken deep root in South Africa. You worked in the prison systems there. Because I think those who have money and power, and it's not a white, even the black people, the few of them that have risen, I think we don't have enough empathy for those who are poor and homeless. And so basically you are seeing, especially the young population, see prison as a university, and some of them will re-offend because prison gives them a security, at least it gives them a security of having a roof over their head, they get 3 meals a day, so they'd rather be in prison rather than being outside, because outside is very, very tough. And it's a sad thing to say we have our children who choose to be in prison because they just don't see any future outside. And there's no doubt there has been progress in South Africa, but when you look at South Africa today, I'm a South African, I grew up in South Africa. I have never seen the level of poverty in my country as I see today. Never. So it's a huge challenge.
So our goal today was to honor you. So I'll wrap it up with one last question. Decades from now, you and I won't be here. We're speaking of the legacy of your extraordinary father. Probably Taquini will be sitting there, and probably 50 years from now, Frank Kenny will probably still be sitting here. And so, sorry, she was our mentor, all of us here. I just wonder for us to wrap up on the legacy of Dr. Makaziwe Mandela, how would you like it written?
Here is an African woman who traveled this world, and everywhere where he stepped, he made a little difference in the lives of the people that he met along the way and touched. That's it.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Makaziwe Mandela.
Thank you for doing this.